everyone, my name is Marian Horgan, and today I'm going to talk about one of my recent hobbies and how I tried to add technology to it. So last year, a lot of people took up new activities and hobbies when they found they had a little bit of extra time. So while a lot of people started baking sourdough bread, I began acquiring plants. And note how I use the word acquiring here rather than growing, because unfortunately, not all of them did grow. May my aloe vera rest in peace. So when this happened, this left me with a few questions. What went wrong? How can I prevent it from happening again? And which one of my housemates was overwatering the plants? But mainly, I wanted to know, how can I grow? How can I grow my plants better? Now, it might seem obvious that all you need is some water, sunlight, and heat to have a thriving plant, right? But I am a computer scientist first and a plant mom second. So I wanted data. And this is how the seed for my idea was planted in my head. If I could somehow monitor the watering of the plants, I would be able to relate how they were doing to how often they were being watered. And then taking this a step further, I wanted to make an experiment. I would take a few plants of the same variety, which happen to be my sunflowers, and have different watering conditions for each, such as hourly, daily, or maybe weekly, for instance. I would add a Raspberry Pi with some soil moisture sensors to track this data and display it on a nice dashboard. And to automate this, I plan to use my Raspberry Pi with a water pump. I figured with this information, I would find the answer to my question, how can I grow? There's this nice quote from Mary Tyler Moore that I find quite applicable here. Take chances, make mistakes, that's how you grow. Because that's exactly what happened. While I may not have grown the plants like how I wanted, I certainly grew from my mistakes. So one of the first issues I ran into was reading the soil moisture values. The output from the sensor was digital, meaning it was either 1 or 0. So the soil was either moist or not. As you can see, this is very limited data, and it wasn't particularly useful for what I wanted. What I needed instead was analog output. Both types of signals can be represented as waveforms, the difference being that analog waves are smooth and curvy and have an infinite value, whereas digital waves are like square and go in steps, so they're 1 or 0, on or off. Because the Raspberry Pi doesn't have any analog GPIO pin, I needed to get an ADC, an analog to digital converter. That way, I would have a meaningful measurement to test my hypotheses. Another issue I learned was that the type of sensor I had was a resistive soil moisture sensor. The issue with this type is that they're susceptible to corrosion over time, because the electrical current sent between its two probes can cause electrolysis. The solution to this is to use a capacitive sensor instead. They don't have any exposed electrodes and are comparatively corrosion-free. Some say it's a good idea to put nail polish around the outside of it. I'm not sure how true that is, though. While not a technical problem, but still something that impeded my project, was that sunflowers grow alarmingly fast. So I was not able to scale my project at the same rate of their growth. Thankfully, though, the sunflowers are doing very well, and they've just started to bloom. And also, it turns out that they like a lot of water. So while my first attempt at techifying was not quite the success I had hoped, I'm a big believer in learning from mistakes. And I thought I would take on everything I had learned and try again. So I bought a greenhouse. Go big or go home, right? This phase of my project is a work in progress, so I'll mainly tell you what I want to achieve. My big goal is to automate a greenhouse with a Raspberry Pi for hydroponic gardening and grow a raspberry. If you can't tell already, I'm a big fan of puns. And for those that are even newer to this than me, what's a hydroponic system, right? So hydroponics is a type of horticulture that involves growing plants without soil. So instead it uses nutrients in the water. There's about 6 or 7 types to choose from. The simplest is the wick system. This doesn't require any electricity, aerators, or pumps. But the system I chose for my project is a drip hydroponic. In this system, the nutrient solution is pumped to the base of the plant, and this lets it trickle down over the root system. As there is no soil, you need a medium for root support, such as perlite, rockwool, or clay. This is my roadmap of my plans. So right now I am doing mixtures of step 1, 2, and 3. My greenhouse arrived recently, but it's yet to be set up. I'm also trying to repurpose materials from my home to construct my hydroponic setup. All you really need is a basin or a bucket to act as the reservoir, and this is where the water with the nutrients is stored. And then a netted pot that has really good drainage to hold the plant, as well as a tray to elevate this over the water. In the meantime, on step 2, I've been working with sensors. So I have a BME 280 sensor, and this checks the temperature, humidity, and pressure. I also have a camera for visual monitoring, and I have an immersive water pump sensor. I'm also looking to get a pH sensor and a water temperature sensor. So all of these values are really important to monitor in order to have the right conditions to grow. But of course, the more parts you have, the more expensive it gets. So I'm going to do a little bit more research before I make that splurge. As for the dashboard, for the moment, I am using Python Flask to display the readings locally. And they're all being stored in an SQL-like database. But in the future, I'd like to try maybe existing IoT dashboards, possibly Blink or some others. And then, of course, my next step is to bring all the parts of this together and have a pretty basic hydroponics system set up. Learning from last time, it is better to have the system set up and debugged before you start the actual growing process. So only then will I transplant the raspberries to my hydroponic system. For a raspberry plant, it's better to start with an already growing one rather than sowing the seeds. And then as a stretch goal on number 5, I'd like to be able to control it remotely. It would be awesome if I could get it to automate regulating the environment, such as opening windows if the temperature got too high, or maybe even adding nutrients to the water. And of course, last but certainly not least, I'll be harvesting the raspberries, because nothing better than to reap what you sow. And after all, isn't the core of my project to grow? And of course, I can't do a talk on plant monitoring using a Raspberry Pi without mentioning GrowLab. So this initiative is something I found out about recently, so kudos to Evan for that. It's a really cool idea from Alex Ellis. So GrowLab is a global contest to grow seeds and share your progress with a Raspberry Pi. You can sign up to become a lab technician on their GitHub and take part. A really cool feature I found of the contest is to create a time lapse of the seedlings growth. I found it really fascinating to watch their growth throughout the day. They move so much, it's like they're dancing. And of course, there's been some common overlap with my own project, and it's been awesome to see how others take on the plant monitoring challenge. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you all for listening. Thanks to Evan and the event organizers for this opportunity today. And I hope you all feel inspired to start growing your own herbs and veg as well. So thank you. And any questions now?
Awesome talk. It was really great. There's a lot in there that I didn't know about, 1, growing plants, and 2, about sensors. Obviously in college we covered some sensors, so but I completely missed the fact that analog versus digital input would need a converter. That's a very good point.
Yeah, this is very new to me. I had never played with Raspberry Pi before, so of course I made lots of mistakes, so they're probably trivial to some experts out there.
Well, that's how you learn, isn't it? You got to start somewhere. Exactly. So actually you mentioned a couple of different rooting materials, and I was wondering, what rooting material did you end up going with?
Yeah, so there's a good few types out there, and they all kind of have different drainage. So I ended up mixing a few. One of them is perlite. I think perlite's made from volcanic rock, I heard. I might be wrong on that, but that's what I heard. And it has really good drainage, because raspberries, it's very important that the roots have good drainage, because they're susceptible for rot in the root.
Wow, okay. Very interesting. You got a piece of volcano in your project.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, you mentioned Flask as well, and I was wondering, did something come pre-made for Flask, or did you write it yourself, or?
I'm only using the basic materials, and there's a library as well for showing on a graph. I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called.
No worries. Okay, cool. And I was very interested to hear that you bought a greenhouse.
That was a big step.
Yeah, I can imagine. I was wondering, at what point did you decide that the greenhouse was the next step, and where does one buy a greenhouse?
Yeah, so technically it's not necessary to have a greenhouse for hydroponics. Like, hydroponics fit well in small environments. But I was kind of after getting really into this whole gardening and acquiring plants, and there just was not enough room in my house. So I made the move to buy a huge, like 18-meter squared greenhouse outside.
Wow, okay.
We got it it's somewhere in Ireland, I think, Offaly or somewhere selling them.
And what beyond the sunflowers, what else, and the raspberries, what are you going to grow in the greenhouse?
I'd love to grow our own veg, so just roots like carrots and onions and even tomatoes. The idea is to be sustainable with our own veg and things. I
Oh,
think.
well, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to go down that route. Hopefully they grow.
I'm looking forward to Farmer Marian Horgan and her commune in the next couple of years.
Me too, me too. Thanks, Evan.
Okay, well, thank you again. So up next, we are going to be